Hi again, everyone. My name is Divna, and we are on a last lecture of this part of behavioral ecology. We will talk today about altruism and social interactions, and this is where we are finishing with this section. Let's start. So, the guy named Auguste Comte was a founder of this philosophy of altruism, which we could describe as the performance of an action that benefits another individual at the cost of the actor. This name is driven from a French language, and it should be a antonym for an egoism. In concept of philosophy, for an altruistic deed, one should have on its mind the idea to help others, but in the ecology sense of this idea, there is no necessity for this kind of a moral driver. So basically, it says that you should have always others in front of your own needs, even in a cost for your own good. So as I mentioned, in the philosophy, it's always driven with that idea, but on the other side, in the ecology, by altruism, we can consider individuals that, for example, spy a predator will give an alarm call, and that's how alerting members of their group, even though such an act would seem to call the predator's attention to the caller. Finally, the lionesses with cubs will allow all cubs in the pride to nurse, including cubs of other females. The main idea of evolution of behavior as altruism in nature is that it allows an individual to increase the success of his genes by helping relatives that share the same genes. Altruistic behavior appeared most obviously in kin relationship, something we'll talk about later, such as in parenting, but may also be evident among wider social groups, such as in social insects. It is important to remember that there is no good or evil in the nature. Every individual is trying to survive and to keep alive their genes. Also, it is not nature by its nature, it's not very romantic, so every action is precisely calculated and done for a good reason. Thus, possibility is that seemingly altruistic acts aren't really altruistic after all. For example, helpers at the nest are often young and gain valuable parenting experience by accessing established breeders. As helpers are the animals who are not really direct parents of the chicks, but are just usually related and helping parents to raise them. Moreover, by hanging around an area, such individuals may inherit territory when the established breeders die. Similarly, alarm callers we mentioned before may actually be benefiting by causing other animals to panic. In such a confusion, the caller may be able to slip off undetected. Detailed field studies in recent years have demonstrated that some acts truly are altruistic, but others are not as they seem on a first glance. Now we are reaching to something that is called reciprocity, and basically what it means is that you are helping others but also expecting in a time of a need help back. There is a proposed theory of something that could be considered a bridge between human perception of an altruism and what actually happens in nature, and it's called reciprocity. It explains that individuals may form kind of a partnership in which mutual exchange of altruistic acts occur because it benefits both participants to do so. In the evolution of such reciprocal altruism, so-called cheaters, so the ones that not really participating, are discriminated against and are cut off from receiving future aid. So basically I have one chance to prove you are a good one in a reciprocity to your giving and taking, otherwise you will be cut off from the society. So if the altruistic act is relatively inexpensive, the small benefits a cheater receives by not reciprocating is far outweighed by the potential cost of not receiving future aid. And under these conditions, cheating would not definitely occur. Here we have a very known example for explaining the theory of reciprocity. It's the case of vampire bats. they roost in hollow trees in a group of from 8 to 12 individuals. And because these bats have a high metabolic rate, individuals that have not fed recently may die. So they need to feed really often. And bats that have found a host imbibed a great deal of blood. So giving up a small amount of presents no great energy cost to the donor, but it can keep a roost mate from starvation. So vampire bats tend to share blood with past reciprocators, and if an individual fails to give blood to a bat from which it had received blood in the past, it will exclude from future blood sharing. So as I mentioned, you have only one chance to prove you're a good partner for this exchange of good deeds. Otherwise you are doomed. From reciprocity, we're skipping to kin selection, something I told you we'll talk later. Kin selection is the evolutionary strategy that favors the reproductive success of an organism's relatives, even at the cost of the organism's own survival and reproduction. And as I mentioned before, it's not like there are some really deep emotions or romantic ideas, but the nature is really precisely calculated and have good reasons for that. Directing aid toward a kin or close genetic relatives, an altruist may increase the reproductive success of its relatives enough to compensate for the reduction of its own fitness. So because the altruist behavior increases the propagation of alleles in relatives, it will be favored by natural selection. So keeping your close relatives, genetically close relatives alive, will keep up your own fitness. Pure logic. Dr. Hamilton, who was founder of this idea, he tried to explain this, and for it he derived from this now what we call the Hamilton's rule, which states that altruistic acts are favored when so-called RB are more than C. And in this expression, the band C are the benefits and costs of the altruistic act. Respectively, the R is the coefficient of relatedness, so the proportion of alleles they're sharing between two individuals. For example, an individual should be willing to have one less child if such action will allow a half-sibling, which shares of course a 1/4 of its genes, to have more than 4 additional offspring. So it will, in general, their genes will benefit more than if an individual would have one less of its own direct offspring. Hamilton's used social insects, Hymenoptera, as his selection models to explain this theory. And in these insects, males are haploid and females are diploid. Here is the example of a social insect group, Hymenoptera or bees. Here I have a bee queen and a working bee. So as I mentioned, the males are haploid and females are diploid. This sexual determination, called the Haplodiploidy, leads to an unusual situation. So if the queen is fertilized by a single male, then all female offsprings will inherit exactly the same alleles from their father, because he is haploid male and has only, of course, one copy of each allele. So these female offsprings will also share among themselves, on average, half of the alleles they got from the queen, and consequently each female offspring will share on average 75% of her alleles with each sister. So 75% are similar of alleles between every single bee in the crowd. By contrast, should we have the offspring of her own, the single bee would only share half of her alleles with these offsprings, and the other half would come from their father. So because of the close genetic relatedness, working bees propagate more alleles by giving up their own reproduction to assist their mother in rearing their sisters, some of whom will be new queens and start a new colonies or produce somewhere else. So their genes are being passed on and maybe further and spreading even more, even in geographical matter. This unusual haploid system may have set the stage of the evolution of so-called eusociality, which means exact, pure social organization, and it's really abundant in Hymenoptera. And indeed, such systems have evolved as many as 12 or many times in Hymenoptera group. All in all, kin selection is a potent force favoring, in some situations, the evolution of altruism and even complex social systems. So about social systems, a group in which social interactions happen is called a society. And society can broadly be defined as a group of organisms of the same species that are organized in a cooperative manner. So we can have a question like, why have individuals in some species given up a solitary existence to become members of a group? It must be for many pros rather than having cons in this philosophy. And one of the explanations can be this kin selection we talked about. So group may be composed of close relatives, which means that you can keep your genes indirectly surviving, helping others around you, which are your relatives, but also they can help you with your direct offspring to survive. Next to this idea, in some other cases, individuals may benefit directly from social living. So, for example, a bird that joins a flock may receive a greater protection from predators. So as a flock size increases, the risk of predation decreases because there are many more individuals to scan the environment for predators, and even if the predator comes, there's a less chance you will be the first target of a predator. And here is the statistics confirming the idea. So in a picture A here, you can see that as the size of a pigeon flock increases, so here hawks are less successful at capturing pigeons. So you can percentage of a success. So more pigeons, less success for hawks, and so on. And on a B chart, you can see that when more pigeons are present in a flock, so number of pigeons per flock, or here, they can detect hawks at a greater distance, thus allowing more time for pigeons to escape, which you can see here. The immediate reaction distance is getting less with the number of pigeons per flock. Of course, insect societies are always a nice example to explain something related to social studies and social interactions. So you can see all these, as I mentioned before, eusocial insects, which means real social insects. So all ants, some bees, wasps, and all termites are eusocial. It means that they have a division of labor in reproduction, cooperative care of brood, and overall of generations, so that the queen lives alongside her offspring. Social insect colonies are composed of different castes of workers that differ in size and morphology and have different tasks they perform, such as workers or soldiers or maintaining offspring and so on. So one concrete nice example of this specific organization of a society, how it works with castes and everybody has its own role in a society and its perfect maintenance, are the leafcutter ants. They're a fascinating example of this remarkable lifestyle of social insects. So here you can see some examples. Through the story you will understand the pictures. So leafcutters live in colonies of up to several million individuals, and they're growing crops of fungi beneath the ground. Their mountain-like nests are underground cities covering over than 100 square meters, with hundreds of entrances in chambers as deep as 5 meters beneath the ground. Of course, this is a picture of their nest I just told you about. The division of labor among worker ants is related to their size. So every day workers travel along trails from the nest to the tree or a bush, and then cut the leaves into small pieces and carry the pieces back to the nest. Of course, you can see this here. So depending on their size, smaller workers chew the leaf fragments into a mulch, while big ones go to get them. And then these mulch, they spread like a carbon in their underground fungi chambers. You can see this here. So even small workers implant fungal hyphae in the mulch. So as soon as they are done with the job, there is basically a garden of fungi is growing. So while other workers weed out the undesirable kind of fungi, nurse ants carry the larvae in the nest to choice spot of the garden where the larvae graze. So basically they're growing the fungi to feed larvae with them. And this elaborate social system has evolved to produce reproductive queen that will disperse from the parent's nest and start new colonies, repeating the cycle with all this social organization dependent on a size individual. Each of them will have its own role in this whole specifically organized society. Next to the Hymenoptera, of course, vertebrate societies are also known to exist. There are a broad range of social behaviors in vertebrates, but still, in contrast to high-structured and integrated insect society we talked about, and also their remarkable forms of altruism, vertebral social groups are usually less rigidly organized and cohesive. So in some complex vertebrate social system, individuals may be exhibiting both reciprocity and kin selection or altruism. So both types can be met in vertebral societies. But vertebrate societies also display more conflict and aggression among group members than insect societies do. Conflict in vertebrate societies generally centers on access of food and mates, which means that as organized as it is in a vertebral society, some type of individualism quoting is expressed. So that's when the conflict comes from, while on the insect societies you have everything well organized and everybody knows their place and there's basically no time for conflict. Enough food for everybody, mating system is perfectly arranged, so there is basically no room for any type of thinking or judging or conflicting about. Behavioral ecologists have learned that the way of a group is organized is influenced most often by ecological factors. So, for example, food type and predation, and thus depends on a species ecological factors. A group can vary in size, stability of members, number of breeding males and females, etc. So different vertebrates have different organization in their society. Nice example is an African weaver bird, which constructs nests from vegetation, provide an excellent example to illustrate the relationship between the ecology and a social organization. So there are roughly 90 species that can be divided according to the type of a social group they form. So on one side you have a set of species live in the forest and build camouflage solitary nests. Males and females are monogamous and they forage on insects to feed their young. On the other hand, you have a group of species that nest in the colonies, trees in savanna. And they are polygynous and feed in a flock on seeds. The feeding and nesting habits of these two sets of species are correlated with their mating system. In the forest, insects are hard to find, but both parents must cooperate in feeding the young. So in the first group, the camouflage nests do not call the attention of the predators to their brood, and that's why both parents can be involved in feeding and food gathering. And on the other hand, on the open savanna, building a hidden nest is not an option. So rather, savanna-dwelling weaver birds protect their young from predators by nesting in trees, which are not really abundant. So this shortage of safe nest sites means that birds must nest together in the colonies. You can see the colonies here or here. And you can also see there's not many trees around it. So because seeds occur abundantly, a female can acquire all the food needed to rear young without a male's help, so on their own. On the other hand, the males, which are free from the duties of parenting, they spend time courting many females, so this drives the polygamous mating system, opposite to the forest type of the same species. A nice mammal example for vertebrate society is a mercat. In this picture you can see a centile mercat on duty, which are species of highly social mongoose living in a semi-arid sands of the Kalahari Desert. And what happens here is that this mercat is taking its turn to act as a lookout for predators, and under the security of its vigilance, the other group members focus their attention on foraging. So this is also a nice example of organization within the society of animals, in this case mammals, which we said are more chaotic than insect societies, but still they're organized in a certain level, obviously doing it with a certain level of success, but they are prone to develop, of course, like everything in the nature. Okay, that's it for today. Thanks for listening. As I mentioned, this was the last presentation for this section of behavioral ecology. From the next presentation, we will start with something else. Okay, thank you for listening. Stay tuned. Bye.